Welcome to Across This Quiet Land, Stories from the Hearts of Canada. I'm your host, Jarrod Daemon. Today we gather with a storyteller whose work has transformed conversations across this country and well beyond it. Paul Kemp is an award-winning documentary filmmaker and the author of Does Your Vote Count? A former national-level track athlete and a proud Winnipeg native, shaped by Kelvin High School and the University of Manitoba. In over 100 films, Paul has explored the hidden aspects of Canadian identity, global mysteries, politics, Indigenous issues, science, sport, and the human condition. His works include The Pretendians, Searching for Satoshi, Nike's Big Bet, Cottagers and Indians, your most recent, The Ozempic Effect, Beyond the Waistline, and many more films shown in over 160 countries. Today we explore the story behind the storyteller, the discipline, the curiosity, the Manitoba roots, and the courage to ask the questions that matter. This is Across This Quiet Land, and this is Paul Kemp. Welcome, Paul.
Thanks for having me.
Paul, let's begin exactly where your story starts, Winnipeg. What did that city give you that still shows up in your work today?
Oh, that's a good question. I still spend I live in Toronto now. I've been here for 31 years, but I grew up in River Heights and I went to River Heights Junior High. I went to Kelvin. I went to University of Manitoba. So until I was 24, 25 years old, my life was Winnipeg. My friends are still from Winnipeg. I have a load of friends here in Toronto. From Winnipeg, I still go to Victoria Beach in the summer. I still have a load of friends there, and I never plan to stop that to the day I die. Hopefully not too soon. But yeah, Manitoba. I even did a film on Lake Winnipeg called Save My Lake a number of years ago for the nature of things on CBC, and that was a real big story in my life because I was worried at the state of the algae blooms that were on Lake Winnipeg. And I had seen my son, who was only like 2 or 3 at the time, get soaked in these things. And I was kind of worried, like, what the heck is this? He's 20 now, and that film is still being taught across Manitoba to all sorts of schools. I think I was able to bring to light the problems with the lake and what Manitoba's up against with algae blooms through the science of that. So, you ask what Manitoba's done. I mean, it's part of me. My mom still lives there. All my friends are there. I love Winnipeg, and probably, as I age, I'll probably spend more time with my friends and contacts there. So, and I don't know if the audience would know this, but we've known each other for 40 years.
Yeah, this is true. Very true. Now, how did your parents influence you towards your chosen profession?
They had nothing to do with it, other than the fact that I never listened to anything they said. They always wanted me to be a doctor, a lawyer, or learn French so I could be a bureaucrat. And I don't know what it was, but since I was maybe 13, 14 years old, I always had the sense that I don't know, I'm just a nonconformist. I never wanted to follow the beaten path of these things. I think they wanted me to do to follow a more tried and true path. And I just never wanted to do that. So when I got into track and field, I always liked the individual sports more than the team sports. I don't know why that was. I did play on the provincial team in baseball there for a couple of years, and I love baseball. It's still one of my passions. But track and field just sung to me. And when I got a track and field scholarship at University of Manitoba, I dropped all my other sports. I had played Tier 2 hockey with the Assiniboine Park Rangers, and for a number of years, I was a pretty good hockey player. I was a good volleyball player. Our team won the provincial championships when I was in grade 10 at Kelvin. But track just talked to me, and that became the sport I became good at. Got a scholarship, and then ran nationally for a number of years. And I still run to this day, 40 years later. So I really enjoy it. So, but back to like what my parents gave me, like they were very supportive of me, whatever I did. They were awesome in that regard. But I don't think they quite understood the path I took. And so when I went through university, they were a little like, I ended up being the president of UMSU, the University of Manitoba Students Union. And a lot of people, I just remember this vividly. Like everyone told me not to run for it, to not go for it, to not try, and it was weird because I was like, I think I can win this thing. I think I know, like I was the captain of the track team that year. I knew a lot of people. I was connected like socially throughout South Winnipeg in particular. And I always liked leadership roles. I liked all those sort of things. And so I went for it. And when I won, like everyone couldn't believe it. And then I won twice. I think I'm the only person who won twice. I'm not sure, but you'd have to check on that. Um, but that was a huge change in my life. And because now I was the head of the university, I was the spokesperson for, I think there was 32,000 undergrads and 5,000 graduate students at the time. So it was one of the largest universities in Canada. And I got known for speaking my mind on issues, on CJOB radio or CBC radio, or just saying things or in the newspapers. And I guess that's sort of guided me. And then after that, I got a lot of potential job offers. I mean, 1994 was probably the worst time to graduate in 92, but 93, 94, I was president of the Students Union, and I came out into one of the worst recessions ever. But thankfully, that job at the university had like put me in the public eye a little bit and allowed me to open up some doors. And a guy who knew me offered me a job in the film industry about 6 or 7 months after I left the university. I went to Europe for 4 months, came back, and got offered this incredible opportunity to be part of a documentary in 1994, and I went across Canada doing a documentary, and then the rest is history. Here I am 32 years later. I made over 100 projects, and I was at one point, the Parliamentary Gallery, it's what it's called, and I was a member of that for a number of years. I did a lot of documentaries, and I just followed my I don't know what it was. I guess instinct to do that, and it's turned out okay. There's been some bumps in the road, but my career's been pretty good. I don't know if you want to get into this, but I ended up getting hired by that same company that found me for the documentary. I stayed there for 21 years, and after 10 years, I was the president. I became president of the company for 11 years. And then when they sold in 2016, I started my own company, and the rest is history. I'm running my own company called Paul Kemp Productions. Anyone can check it out. So my history is up on the.
At Kelvin High School, it's one of those places that produce grounded, thoughtful people. What do you look back on most from those years?
I liked the school. I liked my friends. I hated high school. I really did. I really didn't like high school. I didn't like the way classes, you didn't get much choice in your direction. But there was a guy named Tom Dickens, classified. He was from South Africa and he escaped apartheid. And he was known as a colored, so he is half black guy. And he was just this incredible guy. He had a passion for cricket and soccer, and he would talk about investing in the stock market. And he took us out of his room once, and he had this brand new Honda Accord or something like that. I remember it was quite a nice car for the this is 1985 or 86, and he takes us outside and he goes, "You know what bought this? Not this salary here. It was investing in the stock market." And then I was like, "Wow!" And he started to teach us about the stock market, about ideas and the ways markets and economics work. And he was the teacher, I think, that most touched me. I don't know if he's passed. It's one of those things you sort of wish I probably should have told him this, but in my life, because I'm well into his 90s by now, if he's still alive. But I just remember that hit me, and I liked comparative politics. I liked the way he explained the way the world really worked, not the way you were being taught in school. It was very by the book. And so Kelvin, I'm not saying it was a bad school. Again, my connections there are still lifelong. I still have so many friends from there. I lived in River Heights my whole life until I left. And but it was Kelvin, that class alone probably changed my life and my life direction because it made me choose the classes I did at university. I really excelled at university. I went from being like, I barely got into university. Thank God I had a scholarship. I was a bum in high school. Um, I think I was considered a smart bum, but I was a bum. And I didn't study a lot. And but when I got to university, I started to find my way. I liked psychology. I liked political science. I liked economics. I liked all those things, sociology, and that allowed me to excel. And by the time I finished my last 2 years of university, I think I had a 4.0. I know I was on the dean's honors list the last
Mm-hmm.
year.
Sounds like he planted a seed because everything you mentioned was everything he was exposing you to.
Yeah, and I'm still passionate about the things that uh, you know that he sort of introduced to me. We had a really smart group of kids in that class too. Like I know a couple of them have gone into the film industry. I know one of them's a top lawyer in Chicago now. Um, really interesting people, but we were in this sort of mix of people, and we didn't always agree on things. But it was those were they were smart kids, and I think I just thrived in the debate that happened in that class. And if I had any control over the school system, I would try and get more of those into each year of school so that kids could try that stuff and learn about entrepreneurship, learn about the stock market, learn about statistics and like how like and risk and those sort of things. I think those are the big things
Right,
that I've learned, and it takes a long time to learn the hard lessons of those things if you don't get introduced to it.
right. Now you were a serious athlete in track and field, middle distance, I think specifically 800 meter, at U of M for the Bisons. Track is lonely. It's a lonely discipline, deeply internal. How did running prepare you for long form investigative storytelling?
Well, it's lonely in some ways. I mean, I train with a lot of like I always had training partners. Um, and I always liked the camaraderie of the training partners. It was like pushing yourself to the limit of what you could do. I mean, I was a pretty good runner in high school. I mean, I thought I was better than I was, I guess, because I came from a small province, Manitoba, and thought, I ended up being fourth at the nationals when I was in grade 11 in the 800. It was called the Legion Athletic Camps. We used to go down to the Peace Gardens, and you'd have to qualify. And I made it to the nationals. And I ended up fourth in and I mean that was part of the reason I got a scholarship to University of Manitoba. I was quite good in the middle distance from 400 to 1500. I was pretty good. I would say 1500. I wasn't great. I was better at the 600 and the one. I was actually weirdly enough, somebody sent me the U Sport start lists from 1988, and I was in the 600, and I forgot I ran the 600 there, but uh, yeah, I qualified for the 600 at the Nationals U Sport. So, and I was on the 4x4 100 meter and the 4x800, and we had a really good team that year. We won the national championships in '88. I think that was the first time Manitoba had ever won the U Sport, and we won it easily that year. And I think it went on till my 4 years. We won three of the 4 years. I think we lost in 1989, but I'd have to go look. It actually, to tell you the truth, like,
Yeah.
it becomes a blur. But then a group of kids after us were really good. We had a guy named Byron Goodwin who ended up being probably the most established U Sport athlete of all time. I think he won 16 gold medals, and I was a senior and he was a freshman, and he won, and he went on to just great things. He made the Olympic team in '92, and I'm still good friends with Byron. And so I was a little bit older than him, but we ran on the 4x4 at the Canada Games as well together. So yeah, like it was great. But you getting back to your question, how does it? I mean, I don't know about long distance. I'm wearing headphones now, but for most of my career, I never put a headphone in my ears. I never found running boring. I would go out in winter, and I remember running in River Heights. I would run until minus 35 Celsius outside. If it went past minus 35, I would go to the grotto at the University of Manitoba. And they didn't have gyms with all the treadmills back then, which I wish they did. I probably got injured more because of turning on those damn corners in the University of Manitoba. But I never got terribly bored running. I think it was a time to reflect and listen to yourself maybe and question yourself. And I would go for fairly long runs on the weekends, particularly. I would go for 8 to 10 mile runs on my own. Just put on the bundle up in the winter and just run, do a loop around Assiniboine Park and back to my neighborhood. And that was pretty common. I don't know. I live in Toronto now and I'm a wimp. So the cold weather, I'd go into the gym. But back in Winnipeg, I was just so used to the cold. I would just bundle up and just go. And everyone always used to ask, don't your lungs freeze? And I never felt that. Like I don't know
Right.
what's but I would just think about stuff, I guess. I don't know what I would think about. I think you just think about life and what's going on in your life and your girlfriend or like whatever is going through your mind. I don't know. I always found it a weird question because I never found it boring. It was just time.
Right. Which is important because as a filmmaker, you have to do that. There's time where you have to focus and be creative and reflect and, to think deeply about what you're doing.
Well, I mean, I think most people probably have these moments when they're in the shower or something where they'll just like be quietly thinking about something and something will come to them. You'll get an idea in the shower. I always hear that, or that moment before you fall asleep or whatever, like that's when you're thinking. I feel like running maybe is a little contemplative, like at that point. So I do, yeah, like what I find running, I know I do this to this day when I'm working on an edit on a film and say I've got the film. I don't know if your listeners would know this, but there's a series of stages. You go from a rough cut to a fine cut to a final cut. And um, so at the rough cut, I'm usually sending that into a network. I'm not thinking that much about the story. Like, I mean, obviously I'm thinking about the story, but I'm sending it in CBC or Discovery Channel or Netflix or whoever my buyer is giving me notes back. And it's at that time you have to really dig in and go, okay, what didn't they like about this or whatever? And sometimes I know I'm stuck on something, and that's when I take my headphones off. I don't listen to music. I just go for a run, and I invariably um, solve the problem by the time I get home. I know what to do. I'm just like, okay, that's what I had to do. This is the problem, and I just see it. I think of films like jigsaw puzzles, I guess, and you're trying to make it a perfect picture, but there's always a few um, spots that are not making sense. And often it does take an outsider who hasn't been working on the film to to note that they're confused at a moment or that this didn't quite make sense or this was really good. Is there more of that versus this was kind of boring me? So a rough cut, like for a 60-minute film, let's say, might come in at 90 minutes or 80 minutes. So you have to cut 20 minutes out, plus you have to restructure whatever the issues are. And I find that the best part of filmmaking. I just love that part. Making it better and better. In fact, like when I was younger, I would give a longer rough cut. I think CBC's my last film, The Ozempic Effect. It went on air at 44 minutes, which is a pretty tight film. I think I sent my executive there the cut at 47 minutes. That's how confident I am on my own, like censoring myself now. I know. But she said a couple things back to me. She said, look, this is great. We need more of this and less of this. And like when she said it, I was like, yeah, she's right. Like she was right. Like I couldn't figure it out until she gave me the note, and then I had to go solve it. Went for my run, took off my headphones, and went, okay, this is how I solve this. And then boom. And the film's like doing fantastic now. Like and
Yeah.
from once I get to fine cut and then final cut, you're literally like you're trimming 30, 40 seconds out, and you're just like making things a little bit better. Like a fine cut
Right.
is when you're putting
Okay.
graphics in, or if there's titling or music cues. Those are,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
the score.
Right. Now, I want to move to a bit on journalism, politics, and the book. Before filmmaking, you were in the parliamentary press gallery, as you mentioned. In that crucible of Canadian politics and media, what did that environment teach you about narrative, truth, and power?
No, you're asking me these good questions. Well, I was always interested because of student politics in politics, and I understood that. I had met with the premier, the minister of education, in Manitoba. I was very involved at that level, and um, back in the day, I was involved with a political party to a point, and then I realized, wow, this is really a someone called it the greasy pole of politics, and I love that line. You're trying to climb, and you keep sliding down, right? And 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 the people who do well at that are sometimes. I also recognize they weren't always the. I don't want to call them not the brightest people, but they weren't the they had learned how to play the game better than other people, and that sometimes when I look at the problems of politics today, I think it's not that we don't have talented like communicators. I think it's that some people can't think deeply about how to go from here to there. And I found like politics when I was when I was on Parliament Hill, it was very frustrating for somebody who I was somewhat idealistic. Like, okay, the country's in debt. How would you solve the debt? Well, you would go and you balance the budget. Well, you realize that to balance the budget, there's a million decisions that get made and get sidetracked, I guess would be the word. And it's almost impossible to do it in many ways. So I realized, I guess, idealistically that an individual MP could do something. Well, I was disavowed of that idea very quickly. And I should mention, when you say when I was on Parliament Hill, I was actually making a film. That's why I was there. I was doing a series I did two series. I did well, I did three series actually. I did one called Days of Reckoning for PBS. I did, and another one called Secrets in High Places about how money got spent. And then I did one called Does Your Vote Count, which was the longest time I was there. I followed 7 MPs for a year and a half to try and understand how politics really worked. And I ended up writing a book about that. I used the same, a lot of the transcripts and my insights in my book called Does Your Vote Count? I think it came out in 2004, 2005.
Yes, I bought it.
Oh, did you?
I did for my class. I did for my class.
Well, and it's still I was interestingly enough, I get a check every year from the Public Lending Right Commission, and they tell you how many. I'm still in, I think, 30 universities with that book. So I mean, some of the chapters have hit the mark for sure. So I learned a lot about politics, and I learned a lot about how Parliament worked, and I learned about a lot about the power of the Prime Minister uh, and how control. I guess the biggest thing I would say is that I thought that Parliament and the Senate and the judiciary, the Supreme Court, had more, uh, how would I say, independence than it does.
Right.
I feel like you could, yeah, I mean, it's a bigger discussion on the Supreme Court, but let's just talk about Parliament right now. The I feel like the Parliament it really is in the back pocket of the Prime Minister. And so that person gets a 4-year dictatorship in many ways. And I say that, I'm not saying that in the terms of like they can never get kicked out of that position. We saw Trudeau just get booted eventually. But his control, Trudeau's control over his MPs, over the placements of people, the number of appointments that he could make was just incredibly centralized. And it was kind of like striking to me that the country still operates. It's like we live by. I think what happened, what I started to realize was that we had a set of rules that we got from the British, we inherited from the British parliamentary system that worked and worked and worked until about, I would say, like Pierre Trudeau and Mulroney, they started to control things more. The Prime Minister's office got more control. that's just increased, and it's really a tied up knot where Parliament doesn't have a lot of control. MPs are there for their constituencies, always begging with their begging bowls, asking for more for their constituencies, but not doing what they're supposed to do. And that is they're supposed to be controlling the public purse. That's the normal action of a government, of parliament. Sorry, parliament. You got to separate parliament and government, and everyone gets it mixed up, right? Is that parliament is supposed to oversee the government. The government is the prime minister, the cabinet, and all the people, the bureaucrats in Ottawa and around the country. That's the government. Well, who's supposed to oversee them? Are these people? But when the guy who runs the country has complete control over that thing that's supposed to oversee him, you can understand what happens. There's a problem. It's unwound. So my book, that was what that book was about. And that was what the film was about. And I interviewed all the MPs from the different parties. Judy Washolisha Lees from Winnipeg was one of the people. I got to know her very well for a number of years. And I was following Scott Bryson, who went on to leave the Conservative Party and become a Liberal and a cabinet minister in the early years of Trudeau. And Deborah Gray with the Reform Party. Like people, if you're old enough, you'd remember all these people. But it was interesting to get their perspective. And I really, I think the film like we did that showed on Global TV, it was called Does Your Vote Count, was a fascinating glimpse into that. And then I also, because of that, I ended up rolling into a film on John Turner, former prime minister, which got nominated for the Canadian Screen Award. And that was interesting because Turner was a throwback to the old days. He actually saw the way it used to work and the way it worked, and he was very critical of it. So when I did the film, I think I did the film in 2009 or 10 with him, and I mean, he passed away about 5 years ago, but he was still to the end of his day saying Parliament has been emasculated. The MP's role isn't the same. We need to change this back. And this is a former prime minister who's saying this. You know, he knew
Yeah.
how to play the game, and he was a little idealistic, I guess people would say. But he's interesting.
Yeah. So now the book and the movie and the film you indicated, does your vote count? So let me ask you the question from the title then. In 2025, does our vote matter more or less?
It's a good question. Well, I looked at our vote as being, take a step back. The way we vote for people in your riding is for an MP. So the only thing you're doing is electing the MP from your area. And that person is supposed to represent you. And in that regard, I do not think that that person is representing you the way they should. They are not getting enough influence. They aren't guiding things as well as possible. Now, if you talk to any MP, they're going to say you're full of crap, Kemp. That's not true. I will say, okay, Judy Washolisha Lees, for instance, NDP, very successful, passed a private member's bill in 2004, I think it was, for a little thing that should go on every alcohol bottle that says alcohol kills babies. It passed almost unanimously through Parliament. Have you ever seen that on a bottle of beer in Canada? So what happened? So
No.
Parliament passed it. So what happened? I just ask. Go. I ask any MP to show me all the private member bills that pass, and show if they got legislated into actual action by the bureaucracy or the government. It's almost never happens. So I would argue that our MPs do have a say in who will vote and back up the government. Of course, like the Liberals are in now with a very small minority. It matters that everyone votes on their side and they bring their. So in keeping the confidence of the House and voting on their side, yes, that still matters. But in terms of influence, changing things, it's like tribal warfare, and there's one guy at the top who runs the tribe, and that person has way more power now. And one, like, I heard horror stories about, well, I've heard horror stories both about Harper and Trudeau just not listening to even their cabinet ministers, not giving them the ability to speak. I mean, I think one of the reasons I think Harper was a very strong, smart guy who used the power of the prime ministership very well. I think he was a very smart guy, but I don't think Parliament was the reason that he was doing those things. I think he had, he had a lot of control over his members, and and thank God for the country. He did a lot of good things. But was it a perfect balance between the prime minister's office and Harper? Well, I mean, he shut down any talk of science in Parliament. You weren't allowed to talk about like science cuts or like whatever. Like that's not, even if you're a conservative and you believed in that stuff, you weren't allowed to talk about it. And like I think that caught up with Harper eventually, that his controlling nature ended up being that because he wasn't a smiley guy. He was a very competent person, and I think everybody who knew him knew he was incredibly bright, incredibly ruthless at times. He was a good prime minister in a lot of ways. Did he do that at the expense of Parliament? Yeah, I think so. Or the expense of cabinet ministers who weren't allowed to talk on, or have control over their files. Yeah, like Harper was a bit of a problem in that regard. I mean, we know there's story after story. Like I know he let Jason Kenney talk. I got to know Jason very well when I was on Parliament Hill. I'm still friends with Jason Kenney, actually. And he was one of the guys that Harper let off the leash, and he could do what he wanted, but a lot of his other cabinet ministers were not. Trudeau did the same thing. Everything was running through Trudeau. Like just listen to what happened over immigration policy, housing policy, which was just, I think, unmitigated. I think the country's waking up. It was an unmitigated disaster. Like the housing collapse in Toronto is completely driven by their ridiculous immigration numbers they did for 2 years between 21 and 24 or whatever. The 1.4 million people rushed into the country. That was more than 12 years before that. Like that changed everything very quickly. Trudeau was like, where was Parliament? Where was the cabinet ministers? Where's the people going, hey, whoa, 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 whoa. That's what Parliament's supposed to do. And I don't think it ever has. And so I'll probably end up going to my deathbed still ranting about these things. But and I don't think it's political on either side of the political spectrum. I think it's the role that the individual MP has is important, that we install that and give them more power and control or influence. I'm not saying power, but like
Right.
influence in checking the government. And that would be the biggest thing that I learned in doing in Parliament. I will say that after I did those films, I have stayed away from politics for 60
Had enough of that, eh?
yeah, I went on to other things, and I realized
Yeah.
I for 12 years I did 12
Yeah.
I did a lot of shows on the Canadian military. I did a film in 2003 called A Nation Undefended, about the decline of our military equipment, which we're still talking about 20 years later. You can see my frustration. The same things I was talking about in early 2000s are still happening today. So, and I think we're a weaker country than we were because of that. And I will argue anyone on that point.
Yeah, we need Swedish fighter jets.
Well, we could have purchased. There was all sorts of purchases we could have done but nobody wanted to do it. We could have bought our frigates. We could have gone on the line in 2005 and had our whole frigates, but we got this Buy Canada idea in our minds, and we're still trying to figure out what the regulations should be over making them. So here we are 20 years later with no frigates, a less secure country with less sovereignty vis-a-vis the Americans, but we could have bought the things off. But we played this game of regional development. We've got to buy it here. And I just think we've really made some missteps over the last 20 or 30 years in this country that were avoidable if we had thought strategically where this country could be. And So I love this country, but it does frustrate me at times how the government works. And I guess that kind of drives me in some of my filmmaking, I guess, is that I just think
Yeah.
of, I'm not conformist. I'll leave it that.
Yeah. So let's shift from your political mind now and look here, the documentary mind. A lot of your films explore identity, Indigenous identity in The Pretendians and Finding Winnetou, digital identity in Searching for Satoshi, personal identity in Transformer, and political identity in The Rise of Jordan Peterson. What draws you to that frontier of identity?
Cool stories. I don't think about it really. I never really thought about it that way. Uh, in terms of like that was the film about identity. I think films are about characters. I think that's more the way I would phrase it rather than identity. It's character. What I was fascinated with searching for Winnetou, which is a story about the German infatuation with North American indigenous people. Not allowed to say Indian, but they say Indianer in Germany. They call it the Indianers. I was just fascinated as a historical story of all these German people who would always talk about this mythical character named Winnetou as if it was a real indigenous person. And then when I dug into it, um, there was a guy named Drew Hayden-Taylor who is a very famous indigenous author. He hasn't been outed as a pretendian yet. I joke with him. I've worked. I can joke with Drew about that. He grew up on Curve Lake First Nation. I can attest to this. Looks white, but he is Ojibwe or Anishinaabe. He used to call himself Ojibwe. He calls himself Anishinaabe now. But he's been writing since the late '80s on these matters, and Drew and I became close through another producer on the film named Kurt Spenworth from Edmonton. They had worked in the theater together, and that's how I got connected with him. And I was just fascinated with the German fascination with us, like with Indigenous North Americans. They really like looked at nature and the big wild, and like so we looked into it, and it's a story about Karl May wrote these books between 1890 and 1910. He wrote the best-selling books in German history, and they were all about a Lakota Apache Indian. Anyone who knows anything about indigenous affairs knows that the Apache and the Lakota are not even close to the same tribe, but he morphed them into one character. This beautiful man who was like an indigenous um, an indigenous like superstar. Like he was the Brad Pitt of Indians. And I'm saying Indians because they called them Indians. I'm not saying that pejoratively. Sorry for anyone who's listening to that. But um, and so that film, we went over to Germany for 2 weeks and we filmed that, and then we went to the Yukon and we found Germans here, and we just looked at, I think it's more about, that story was more about cultural appropriation of an idea. Like, is it okay for another country to steal your identity and make it a pastime? But then we flip it, and the funny thing in the movie is we flip it back, and then we go to Oktoberfest in the last act. And so we all go and dress up in lederhosen and go to Oktoberfest. So we sort of like flip it, and the audience really liked it, and that film did very well. In fact, so well that I did that in 2017. It went to air, I think, 2000, and CBC renewed it last year for another 4 years. It's done so well on CBC that they keep renewing it, and teachers across the country are teaching about it, about just looking at the lens of who are you? Like, is it okay to take somebody else's identity? Is it okay? Like, where's that fine line between appropriation and appreciation? Because a lot of the people there were actually very, they did not look at indigenous people in a negative light, and it was weird that they would dress up in teepee, like live in teepees and headdresses and things like that. And, but
Can you share one of the most memorable moments of filming that documentary? Like something that just really,
oh yeah,
kind
there's
of sticks with you.
if anyone wants to really get freaked out, it's just outside of Munich, in Bavaria. It's a city called Pullman City, and Pullman City, Pull, man, like Pullman. It becomes an Indian camp for about 2 months of the year. So people from across Germany go there and spend their holidays, and they have fake teepees. They have an Indian camp where people actually have learned how to make actual teepees. Like some of the work there is just incredible. And a lot of indigenous people from, like, we met a couple people. We met a Mohawk guy from Detroit area. He was there. He was dancing there. They they weren't offended as much by it. Um, but it is something to behold. Seeing
Yes.
a load of Germans dressed up in war paint and running around with tomahawks, and like it's real, and it's a real thing. And that was a really interesting thing
Yeah.
to see that in Germany. So
Right.
it was a great trip, and I think the film has really shows it. People can just click on, if you say Winnetou, like it's spelled like Winnipeg, like Winnetou. That's Winnetou. If you just wrote Winnetou CBC, it'll just pop up and you can watch it on. I think it's
Hmm.
on YouTube, CBC's
Right.
YouTube, and
Okay.
it's a fun watch. It's like it's really
Hmm.
interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I watched it, and yeah, shocking, surprising, and definitely that connection with Aryan ideas of Hitler and that, and how that was infused in it as well, and attributed to North American indigenous as well.
That
It,
is
it
actually
really,
I forgot about that part.
yeah,
Yeah, like that Hitler was obsessed with the Lakota Indians. He saw them as Übermensches, as Nietzsche used to say. The Übermensch, Superman. And Hitler was very influenced by Karl May's writings. In fact, he went to his funeral in 1912 before he joined the force. Like he was obsessed with it. So it comes into his writings in Mein Kampf and his view of humanity. And he the indigenous, the North American Indian, as he called them, a member of the Aryan race, which is really interesting. So maybe that was
yeah,
the most interesting thing about it. I don't know.
right. now, 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 on a serious note, I want to talk about the Pretendians, which sparked major national conversation. What was the emotional weight of telling a story that was charged and sensitive like that?
Well, I think Drew. I should mention that the three Indigenous movies I've made with CBC, Drew has been my partner on. Drew Hayden-Taylor, who is Indigenous. So we always have to like do a little "Who is Drew" at the beginning of the film. But he was quite concerned because Michelle Latimer, who was a top director who had directed one of his plays, had been outed as a pretendian, that she had never had indigenous blood, or she claims to this day that she didn't. That she didn't know, but she was outed, and then Joseph Boyden came out, and another writer like Drew knew him personally. So he really wanted to do it. So I worked on that film with him, and I came up with the concept, and I co-directed it with Drew. I do most of the directing with Drew, but he directs and decides what we're going to do. So like how comfortable he feels with a certain interview, or what's the scene that we'll have fun with, and then we come up with ideas together, and so Drew and I did that in 20 that wasn't very long ago. That was like 2022, I guess. Like it was during COVID, right? So that was tricky, was the COVID part, getting around to doing that. But we that film, I didn't it wasn't my name. Some professor at one of the universities in BC had coined the word pretendians, but I'm pretty sure by me naming the film that, changed the dynamic of how we talk about it, because now it's like everyone knows what a pretendian is. But that film did extraordinarily well. The audience was massive. It started a huge public debate on this. And Drew went on, like again, when the film gets released, I don't do the PR. Drew does. Drew's the Indigenous guy. He's the guy on camera. He's the guy whose voices it. And so Drew did that, and we ended up winning the Canadian Screen Award for Best Documentary, actually. So it did
Yes, I
really well.
remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a huge win. We won a lot of awards for that film. Again, you can just watch it on CBC Gem or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. You just have
Yeah.
to type it in and it'll pop up. Um,
Yeah.
it's good, but and then this week, I mean, here's the crazy thing. While I was doing the film, people knew I was doing the film, and I got approached on the Buffy St. Marie story. Uh, People actually sent me folders during that saying, "Hey, Buffy's not Indigenous." And I was like, I was halfway through the film. We had already decided what we are doing and who on. Um, and I said, like, I don't have the bandwidth for this. So film. And I think it was like a year later, Buffy gets busted. I already knew she was going to get busted because I went through the files. Like, oh my God, this is bad. Like, this is really bad. And, I thought hard about doing that film. Like, should I do a film on Buffy? And I think she had a big influence on Drew. So we talked to CBC and they said, well, you guys just did pretend we're going to run with this. We're not going to. So I actually approached, I don't know if CBC would admit this, but I gave CBC the story. And CBC Fifth Estate did the story on Buffy St. Marie. So uh, the woman who approached me, I got them in touch with the producer at CBC, and they broke that story. And they did a good job. They followed up, and they had to do the journalism to make sure that it was true, that the files that I had were legitimate, that all that. And then maybe a month after that, I got the files on Tom King. Another guy follows, and Tom King, the famous Canadian author who just was busted this week. He came up and said,
Really?
I've never been Cherokee. I knew in 2022 that he wasn't Cherokee. I have all the files on my computer. I'm looking at them right now. I have a whole file, Tom King file. And Drew was friends with Tom, approached Tom, mentioned it, and Tom says, well, as best as I know, I don't know what was said between the two of them. And I said, well, do you want to do a second one on Tom King? Like, because we could do. Anyway, Tom came clean this week. And a lot of people are very hurting by this because he's
Edible.
probably the most famous indigenous author who is in Canada. Um,
The truth about stories. I read it. It's
he
huh.
just he just came out in the Globe and Mail on Monday saying that he is not indigenous. He never had it. I know for a fact he knew that people knew as far back as 2022 because I have the files and I've sent them to a couple of people. And I said, if you guys want to follow the story. So I didn't, quite frankly, I was working on a much lighter topic with Drew Hayden-Taylor. We did a series on APTN that people can watch. It's called Going Native with Drew Hayden-Taylor. And it's a really fun celebratory story about Indigenous people. What are the good things? And we did 39 episodes on together. Yeah, it's a big show. It's even on Air Canada. I saw it was on the Air Canada.
I'll
So that
recommend
show,
that to some.
I did 39 shows with Drew on that, and that was really
Yeah,
great. We went to um, First Nations across North America. We did all sorts of interesting stuff. So yeah, it was cool.
I'd probably recommend that for teachers of history. That probably good for them to utilize.
Well, it's a positive story about the Indigenous experience. Like everything's a bit downer, like and searching for Winnetou was a fun thing. And in fact, APTN approached me after I did Searching with Winnetou because it was such a fun show. They said, "Well, why didn't you approach us?" And I said, "Well, CBC commissioned it. I'm gonna work with the CBC on it, so I did it." They said, "Well, can you come up with a fun show for us?" And I said, "Sure." So we came up with Going Native with Drew Hayden-Taylor, and it's been a real big success. It's a really fun show. So yeah, if anyone wants to see it, it's on AP. If they it's a fun show. So I did that. Yeah, that was a long journey. That was a 4 year.
Well, let's shift gears here and let's talk about your detective story, searching for Satoshi. That's part global mystery, and detective story. What surprised you the most during that 4 year investigation?
That was the craziest story I've ever done. So just so your audience knows who Satoshi is, they might have heard the name Satoshi Nakamoto. Well, the tagline of that movie is the mysterious disappearance of the Bitcoin creator coin. He creates Bitcoin in 2008. He stays with the project. He launches it. He starts mining it. I can talk about the details if you want about Bitcoin. But he starts doing the first cryptocurrency of all time. And then in 2011, just vanishes, just never heard from again. And we know that when he created the currency, that there was only going to be 21 million Bitcoin ever created. That's not very many Bitcoin. Think about the number of dollars we produce every day. There's only going to be 21, and so 21 million. He mined over 1 million of them, so he owns 1 million, and he vanished with those million. In today's dollars, that's around it's over 100 billion, about 100 billion that is vanished. And it's just going to keep going up every year. That Bitcoin's been averaging around 35 to 45% a year. Has usually every third year has a down year, but it's like consistently gone up. So each Bitcoin today, I don't want to date your podcast, so maybe I won't say, but it's over $90,000 right now, but it's been as high as 120,000. So it goes up. It's very volatile, but it keeps going one way, up to the right. And so he's been worth as much as $125 billion. This guy who we don't know, and he vanished. And so I was just fascinated with the story. I'm fascinated with the technology. I think it's the biggest change that we're ever going to have in the financial system of all time. And I mean, we could talk for hours. I could talk for hours on Bitcoin. I'm just a huge believer in it. I started investing in it way too late. I wish I had started investing when I had heard about it in 2011, 12. I was an idiot and I didn't buy anything. I'd be very wealthy right now, right? I'd own an island by now. But I just got fascinated and the story took off. And so last year got nominated for 4 Canadian Screen Awards. It did not win because I was up against the Tragically Hip, which was here in Canada, never come up against the Tragically Hip in an award ceremony.
Very true. Very true.
Yeah, but it was it was a really good film. It's on CBC right now. It's still airing, and it's on YouTube. You just have to write Satoshi CBC, and it'll pop up. And that was a crazy story because I went down so many alleys, I'm pretty sure I got the right guy, but we don't know until those coins move. Yeah, a lot of people have reached out to me, think I got the right guy, think I got the story right, but
okay.
we're not going to know until those coins move. And
That's
he hasn't
right.
moved them, and we
Yeah.
know it's a he, by the way. I mean, it's not a she.
Okay. Yeah. So now, in the rise of Jordan Peterson, a very polemic individual, how do you go about creating a balanced approach and telling the story of such a controversial person?
Yeah, well, I heard him. I didn't know who he was actually. In 2016, he was on Joe Rogan podcast, and I was sort of into Joe Rogan's podcast at the time. I found him. I know a lot of people think he's a lunatic, but I found Rogan, and Peterson went on, and I went, "This guy's in Toronto, and this guy's saying these things about political correctness on campus, and things that I'd been thinking about since I was at the University of Manitoba." And so I called Jordan, just called him out of the blue, like the minute I heard it, like the next day I called him and his wife answered the phone. I don't think he was getting a lot of phone calls at that time. This is like before he was famous. He had been, a lot of people shouted him down in this event at the University of Toronto, and that's why it's called Shut Him Down, because they used to chant shut him down, and it was about him, right? And so I just called him, and his wife said, "Come on over for coffee tomorrow." I said, "Okay." So I went over and I talked to Jordan for 3 hours, and I told him that I was a filmmaker. I showed him my I had to earn his trust a little bit. And he said, well, there's this woman who's been following me for like a while talking about these things. She has all those footage. And I said, well, can you give me her number? And her name is Patricia Marcochia, who I am very close to today. She had all the footage of him getting shut down. She had been following him for a different project. And I approached her and I said, I think there's something here. And, it took about 4 months of us, Patricia and her husband, Mazir, um, talking to me. And then we did a deal and I said, let's work together. And then I sold the show to CBC. And you'd think CBC wouldn't do it, but I don't know. I'd earned enough trust with the CBC people by then that they kind of trusted that I was going to take a balanced view on him, not do some screed from like that he should be banned or that he had all the answers, and cut down the middle. And so we produced a show for CBC called Shut 'Em Down. It's still you can still watch it on Gem. And and then we released a featured doc, a much longer 90-minute version of the film, or maybe it's 100-minute. But I have to be honest, I didn't direct that film. I was the producer and the writer of that film, so I was guiding a lot of the decisions in the edit and what the storylines were going to be. But I wasn't the director. I wasn't calling the shots. I wasn't with Jordan every day with the camera. Patricia was with him. And the show, like, it ended up being a huge hit. It was during COVID. Weirdly enough, we released it in 2018. 2019, it was number one on Apple podcasts, Apple TV. You know how you had to download off Apple back in the old days? Most people just have streaming services now. But during COVID, it took off again, and he became number one on Amazon. That film became number one doc on Amazon.
That's amazing.
Because around North America. So it was a really interesting film. It was very balanced. I've never had anyone say it wasn't balanced, but Patricia and Maz, as producers, they are more, I would say, progressive. I was more of the center right kind of guy. And we're a good team because we're balanced the ideas, right? And I think that's important to have different perspectives. And they got shunned. Like, they got told that, like, we had Antifa making death threats against us about that film. They told us they were going to slit our throats if we brought it to Seattle. It was weird. Like, and so we lived that sort of, a lot of people think that, oh yeah, this was this woke thing or this shut them down council wasn't real. It was real. Like, they really wanted to do us harm. We had to get security for some of our screenings. It was like, it's a film. Come and watch the film. And
so it's like you have freedom of speech as long as you're saying stuff that I want to hear.
Yeah, well, at that time, this is like 2021, 22. That was no, 2019. Yeah, it was 2019, I guess. This is when it was really peaking, and then COVID just amplified.
Yeah, that's right.
So those kind of films were interesting. So yeah, I think that film was. I'm really proud of that film, and I'm really proud of Patricia's work on it. She did a really good job, and she's such a thoughtful filmmaker. I'm glad I was partners with her on that. And it's still selling little by little. I think we sold 40 or 50 countries on that around the world. And
okay. So now you've worked in sports, science, politics, indigenous issues, identity, and technology. What's the through line connecting all your work?
My curiosity. I get bored. I think, somebody said I got ADHD, and probably anyone listening to this probably thinks I do. And I've got a lot of energy. I can juggle 5 balls at the same time. So often I'll be working on 3 projects at the same time, and I can flip from one edit suite to another and very quickly. I think that's a gift and a curse. So sometimes I don't focus enough because I'm doing too many things, but other times it's been really good from a business perspective that I can keep a lot of balls juggling at the same time. So I'm working on a show right now on beavers, literally on beavers. in Manitoba, I'm shooting a nature film about a 2-year-old beaver and his journey over the next year of his life. I listened to a podcast about beavers a while ago. I was fascinated. I was like, wow, I dug into it. I said, this is great. I wrote a script. I wrote a story, pitched it, and it sold. If you told me 2 years ago I was doing a series on like a film on beavers, I would say that it's crazy, right? But
Mm-hmm.
um, I was just super interested in these animals that I saw all through my life, but I didn't really know anything about them until I listened to this like 3-hour podcast about their life cycle. And I was like, wow, this is like a story that should be on film. And I had never seen it. So I came up with a new concept and I used my skills, I guess, as a storyteller to try and frame it in a different way. Like instead of having a scientist, oh, this beaver is like over here, like, oh, we're gonna go in here and you'll see the dam here. This is told through the voice of the beaver, and it was a different take. And so we're in the middle of filming. I'm doing that for TV Ontario, and I've got a big distributor out of Singapore and the UK who's supporting it internationally right now. So that should release at the end of 2026. We filmed a number of days this fall actually, and we're filming in the duck forest of Manitoba. So yeah, and I'm working with a filmmaker named Sam Carney out of Winnipeg. He's a great filmmaker. Sam Carney, Ice River Films. Yeah, they're a really good film company.
What makes a Canadian story resonate internationally? You've done like 100, like into 160 countries. Your films are seen.
Yeah. Well, I think not every film does. I think that's one of the big mistakes that young producers do is they try and sell a show that doesn't have a lot of global legs. I did a film called Nike's Big Bad, a sports show about the number one track and field coach in the world who got banned from the sports for drugging his athletes, but none of his athletes had been caught drugging. I was like, how do you kick the coach out for drugging if none of his athletes got caught? Like, so I made that into a mystery called Nike's Big Bad, and that's sold 86 countries so far. It's about this coach named Alberto Salazar, and he had won the Boston Marathon, the New York City Marathon in the 1980s. He was a legend of running across the
Absolutely. Absolutely.
A lot of people who know sports have heard of Alberto Salazar. So that's what the story was about. And so I didn't think there was much interest. So I met with a German broadcaster in 2019, and I said, "This guy just got banned. Do you guys know this?" And they all knew who Alberto Salazar was. And they came on. Weirdly enough, that film was not commissioned in Canada. It was commissioned by the national broadcaster in Germany and the national broadcaster in France. And then I came and I sold it to the UK. My partner actually sold it to Sky Sports in the UK, which is the largest pay station of sports, and they came in. So I had the money through that, and then I came back, and the last person to buy it, the last network, was CBC. So I went backwards. But the show is sold very well. It was released just before the Tokyo Olympics. It won the best sports documentary at the Canadian Screen Awards a few years ago, and it's a really again, it's on CBC. You can watch it. Anyone can just click on and just watch it. Just write Salazar and CBC or whatever, it'll pop up. And I'm just fascinated with that story. So that came from back to your question, like, why do I do things? I mean, I'm fascinated with track and field. I'm fascinated with Bitcoin. I'm fascinated with identity. I'm fascinated with beavers. I'm fascinated with, I don't know. I've just been curious, and I don't know. I guess I also know how to sell them because I know a lot of the networks around the world, and I know the buyers of these things. And I have a really good agent in LA who helps me open up doors if I don't know how to sell it. So my goal is just come up with great ideas. So like I'm pitching some really interesting shows. I've got 6 in development right now that 0 people have said yes to, but I'm hoping by next spring I'll have 1 or 2 of them rolling. So I'm always in development and sales mode whenever I'm not making the film, and that's the process. Just I have to always have a new idea. Yeah. So I'm doing one on bad behavior, why we do bad things. And I'm really fascinated with human behavior, evolutionary psychology, why we, you know, why do we drink too much? Why do we do all sorts of bad things? Yeah.
Yeah. We're moving towards the end here, and we're going to talk a bit here about Canada, truth, and the future. Now, after all your work in these diverse areas, do you think Canada is becoming more comfortable or less comfortable with uncomfortable truths?
Less comfortable. I think it's getting better the last year or two. I think that we are not very good at saying things that we know are true. I think our like a lot of it is driven by the mainstream media, and I don't want to talk about that in some jingoistic, oh, the mainstream media versus the, conspiracy theory media. But there were like, a lot of people getting shut down. Like let's use the example like of um, the lab leak. I mean, on the vaccines. You weren't allowed to talk about that for 3 years. You weren't allowed to type into your computer natural immunity. Seriously, you were not allowed to write that without getting banned from social media for 3 years. Everybody now agrees that, well, maybe natural immunity was something to do with the equation. And what I think they're up to like 80% of scientists believe that the lab leak's probably the most logical way. I mean, it hasn't been confirmed, but to say that that wasn't part of a discussion that should have been happening was insane. Probably anyone who doesn't think about it, like maybe a lot of your listeners are just, I'm losing them right now because they think one way or the other on that thing, right? But that we can't discuss that is what drives me crazy. So what happened was so many people. I'm going to a conference next week in Rio. It's the World Science of Science and Factual Producers. It's a huge conference. 1,000 people will come, and these are buyers and sellers of films. And I go to this thing, and there are certain things you cannot say. You cannot question climate change. You cannot question the sun's impact versus carbon impact. You cannot say those things in plate circles. And I'm serious about that. You cannot say those things. And I'm like, well, but that there should be. I'm not saying one side's right or wrong. I'm just saying there should be a discussion about those things in films, particularly in Canada, is that those discussions are not happening publicly on the mainstream media. You can have different opinions on all sorts of issues, from Palestine and Israel to whatever. And I mean, if you put an Israeli film into Hot Docs last year, it would not have got picked. I know for a fact it would not have got. Hot Docs is the biggest documentary festival in Canada. Couldn't, no way on earth a film like that. We saw that happen with the Toronto International Film Festival when a guy did a hero story of a guy coming through. He was called like a hero grandpa who saved his family after they were getting attacked by Hamas. The film didn't take a lot of political opinions. It was a film about a grandpa saving his kids. It got banned from the TIFF until there was an outcry, and finally they turned it. So that was like 2 months ago. So finally the tides are turning a little bit. I think everyone's recognizing they've gone too far into like shutting ideas down. And I think we should be talking about all sorts of ideas. And I think it's going to be a growth place in Canada. I hope Canada is getting out of its funk. Like, I'll ask you, could you do a film in Canada about the goodness of energy production? Could you could you could you do a film on that? we live we live in one of the coldest countries in the world. We need energy, we need electricity, we need all these things. You could not do a film on that in Canada. I'm telling you, I wrote somebody at CBC. I heard internally that CBC is really like realizing that they need to talk. So I wrote a proposal of the 10 films CBC would never do. Somebody I know at CBC. And they laughed and they said, yeah, you're right. Like, we would never do these films. And I said, yeah, but they're all films that should be done. They're all films that should be done. And I said, but they would never do them. And I would send them to global television and they would do the same thing. That, no, we can't talk about those things. So what's happening is the media, the mainstream media, is at least cracking a little bit on this. I think there's going to be opportunities for people who are willing to talk about these taboo subjects that shouldn't be taboo in the first place. I mean, these are, to talk about, is oil a legitimate thing that we should be, processing in Canada or something, is like, I don't think that's a crazy thought to have. Look at Landman, who did like that show on Paramount of Billy Bob Thornton. It's such an interesting way of taking it. It shows the warts and all the bad things about the oil industry, but it also gets to the fact that we need oil for now. You may not like that, but it's a truth. So we need to deal with these things, and I'm all for letting her rip on that stuff. Like rip the Band-Aid off. Let's talk about things. Don't be scared to talk about it. And I say that from the other perspective too. Like, let's do stories about it. Is religious teachings only at homeschool a good thing or a bad thing? Well, I think CBC would do that show, but they wouldn't do the opposite side. Is homeschool? You know what I mean? Like, there's two sides to these stories, and I think we should just be way more open. So your question was, is Canada more? I think we've kind of went peak crazy, and I think we're coming back. And I hope that we get more diversity of thought, not just diversity of like what people look like on camera. It's like diversity of what they think on camera. And I think that Travis Dessange, who left CBC, brown skinned guy from Calgary, didn't fit their mold. And he's been talking about this a lot. And he's running a podcast I've been listening to. He's a really balanced guy. Like, he's an interesting guy. Like, he's not a lunatic. Like, he's, you know, but he thought that certain people should be talked to on air. And we should be talking in it. So I hope we move more in that direction. I hope we don't shut ourselves up. I hope people can talk freely I hope we don't hate our friends because they have a different political opinion. And I feel like that we got there to a point like where people were shunning other people and calling them, because I think the murky middle is like, 80 or 90% of us are in that middle place, like trying to figure it out, and I think that's the place where, and I hope as a storyteller, I can do a little bit more.
Yeah. So what story have you not told yet, but feel called to tell?
Well, that's my big one I'm pitching right now. Yeah, it's hard for me to find that. Yeah, I'm not gonna probably say it right now.
It's okay. Yeah.
I
No.
tell you off camera, but yeah, right now it's like when I'm pitching it, I think it's not a hard one for people to steal, but I think I'm onto something.
Good.
Yeah, but I usually like, that's interesting you asked that, because when I'm doing films, I often like The Ozempic Effect was a really interesting film to me because it's about how are these weight loss drugs affecting society, and it's done very well. I was listening to so many people talking about taking these GLP-1 drugs, and I was like, wow, this is going to have a huge impact. So the film is done really, really well. Was that a film that was calling to me in my heart? No, I saw a social phenomenon that was happening that I thought could be told in a really interesting way. And the film, I spent the last 7 or 8 months doing that film, and I'm very proud of the film. But was that calling my heart? It was an interesting way to look at things. But occasionally, like the Satoshi film on Bitcoin, and this, like that, I was like, this is a story like this, and I love when you get that. And once in a while, you do get it. Like, and if it keeps coming back in my head, if the idea keeps like niggling at my brain, I'm like, then I got to do it. And then that's when I put the pitch together. That's when I put pen to paper. That's when I start getting I shoot a sizzle reel or what's called a demo tape. And I start to say, okay, this is how I see this film.
Right. So here's a lightning round questions for you then. So, these quick little bursts here. A filmmaker every Canadian should study.
Mike Dowse. I think he's the best. Mike Dowse did Fubar. He did What's Wrong? It's All Gone, Pete Tong. It's All Gone, Pete Tong is the greatest Canadian film of all time. You wouldn't even know it's Canadian because it's about a British guy. I think Mike Dowse is a brilliant, hilarious filmmaker. He does when you're talking about drama. When you're talking about, I think Jamie Kastner's an interesting documentary filmmaker. He does interesting films. Jamie and I are competitive with each other. We're friends, but kind of not friends at the same time. I like his films though. He did one on stealing. They're all fake. There are no fakes. It's a great documentary about people stealing Indigenous Novo Moroso's Indigenous art, and they created a farm in Thunder Bay. It is a really interesting film. So he's a really interesting filmmaker. Yeah, there's some. So I would say those two guys are like I put them up there.
Next question. A documentary that changed your life.
Probably Waco, the original Waco movie. It was back in the 90s, 97, I think it won the Academy Award. And then the documentary that changed my life. So watch the first Waco. It's incredible. It tells the story. I didn't realize just how crazy the FBI and everything was until I saw, like, you always hear Koresh was the bad guy, always the bad guy. Well, yeah, he was a lunatic. He ran a cult. But what happened, what actually happened was fascinating. That was a fascinating story. That would be worth watching. And then my favorite documentary of all time, I've watched it at least 25 times, is The Fog of War by Errol Morris. And it's a really interesting piece about why we go to war. And it was told through the voice of Robert McNamara, who was the he won the Academy Award probably around 2003, 2004. I talked to Errol Morris about it actually. I think it was a brilliant film. It goes through the 10 reasons we act when there's a war situation and how that fog blinds us all. And what I think he got to was a guy at the end of his life who looked back at his own life with honesty, and he told the story of like, we got to watch out. And it was a lesson for the future on all war. And I thought it was a fascinating, I just, everyone should watch that film. It's so good. So those two for sure influenced me and my storytelling a lot.
Okay, next question. Most Winnipeg thing about you?
Probably the way I talk, my love, and my love for 50 beer. I used to think that was Labatt 50 was a craft beer at the time. It was terrible. I still drink it though whenever I'm in Montreal. And probably Victoria Beach. I love Victoria Beach. I still
Now
like the
you're,
Jets, but I'm still a Jets fan actually.
of course, you have to be. Yeah. Favorite track or running moment you ever ran?
Uh, that's a great question. I ran for Kelvin High School in grade 10. Dr. Orlico, John Orlico's father, was the coach. Everybody knew Dr. Orlico. He was well known in Winnipeg. He drove us down in a van to the out of state Minnesota Championships in Alexandria. And it was a huge meet. And I think we were the only Canadian team. And so there's kids from South Dakota and North Dakota and Minnesota, maybe Wisconsin. Huge meet. And it was a 3-mile race. And I'd never been in a meet like that in my life. Like I was in grade 10 and I went out and I had done very well at the high school meets in Winnipeg. I'd won a couple of the city meets, but this was like a different kettle of fish. Like I was out in the middle of these guys, and I was in like 12th place through halfway, and I was feeling okay. I was like, what the heck? Well, how am I in 12th place? Like there's 500 kids in this race, right? Like, and I'm like in 12th place, and I started feeling pretty good. And I remember Dr. O going, "Hey, you're like you're moving up, you're moving, whatever." And like all of a sudden, like we went down this hill, and I just got like maybe 1,000 meters from the finish line. I started moving, and I was back, and I got up to eighth, and then I got up to sixth. And as we came around, I had about 400 meters to go, and I'm an 800-meter runner. I'd gone to the National Legion track championships a few months earlier. I started going. It was me and some guy, and I dove at the finish line, and I won by 1/10 of a second over 3 miles. And I was
That's
collapsed, and the
exciting.
guy landed on top of me, and I won the out-of-state championships.
Wow, that's amazing. That's a great story.
Oh, it
Well, you
was
should.
it was like the crowd was going crazy, and like yeah, it was insane. I still can put myself, and the weirdest thing about it was they were playing that Twisted Sister song.
We're not
What
going
was
to
it?
take it.
Yeah, we're not gonna as the song as I was running, and that to this day, every time I hear that song, I just think about being in the muck coming around on this finish line and just dying over the last 40 meters and holding on to win that race. That was my best
That's
time.
amazing. That's
I,
amazing.
I probably
Now,
peaked at that moment.
now, a moment you knew filmmaking was your calling.
Probably when I was I started to get the sense of it when I was in the edit suite really early in my career. Um, I used to be able to look at edits and know what was wrong with the cuts very fast. I was like, I,
I would say even before you got into the edit room, the
oh,
moment you
before that,
knew.
no, I
Yeah,
was
the
out in the
moment
field.
you knew.
I worked, no, I didn't know at that point. I didn't know before I got in the edit suite. Like I was helping to cut this film, and I just started like, um, uh, yeah, I think it was, I started to start to see, I'd watch a rough cut and I would go, no, this is wrong. It's not in the right order. Like it's got to go like this. Should start it like this. And I started to realize that the craft of it was really important. And I was able, I knew I could put the jigsaw puzzle better together than the editors could. And I started to go, okay, but I didn't have any power. I was just a young kid doing this stuff. I didn't know anything about it. And then as I started doing more of them, I started to like that was like if I have any gift, that's what it is. I can see the story as I'm filming it, and I know the order of the story. So I don't know. That called to me, and I was like, no, I'm good. I think I'm good at this. Like I think I'm pretty good at this. And you have to be humble because there's always somebody better than you. Like there's always somebody who does something different. I do it in my way, but I think like whenever I talk to broadcasters, they always say when they watch a rough cut, they know that they can see the show. Like it doesn't need to be fixed very much. They might have a few comments, but it's not like they see it. And I think that's sort of where I'm strong. If anything, I see structure of film, I guess.
And so the last lightning round question here, the Canadian value the world misunderstands.
Hmm. That's an interesting thing. The Canadian value that the world misunderstands. I think they don't understand how small the country is. I have always found like that's the thing that I found weird. I'm in Toronto. I'm one separation. I'm like 1 degree of such separate. Like I'll talk to somebody and that person will know somebody and I'll know like I'll be, oh my God. So you walk into a party, like I would say 1 or 2 degrees of separation, you know somebody in this country. I think in America that must be almost impossible because it's so big. But maybe because I went through university and I live in neighborhoods where, other people I might know have moved to, like that whole thing. But when I'm around, like I'm 2 phone calls away from the premier of Alberta, the premier of Manitoba. I could call the premier of like I know for a fact I could make a call to the Premier of Nova Scotia right now with one call to a friend who would get me in the door. Like I know that. That's how small the country is in a lot of ways. It's a very small place, and I don't think it people understand that that also makes it strong in some ways. Like that's a strength. I always thought that that was the biggest strength of Winnipeg, that Winnipeggers themselves don't recognize that they have, is that the connection to Winnipeg is so tight that when you're out of Winnipeg, you are always a Winnipegger and you're connected to somebody who is a Winnipegger. So I'll go to, like, my wife's from, she grew up in Ireland, and then she was in Edmonton and Waterloo, and then we moved to Toronto when I met her. Like, we've been married for a long time. And she always says, I cannot believe how many people you know from Winnipeg. Like, she just cannot believe that. But I think Canada's sort of a, like, maybe without Quebec, but Montreal would be part of that. But just, the English Canada is what I would say very connected. I'm sure that's the same in French Canada, but I don't know that. But it really is a small place, and it's just, if you've been working here and connecting for years through sport or business, you're going to know somebody, and that person's going to know somebody, or that person's kid is going to know somebody, and it's really weird how tight that is. And maybe that connection is what keeps us together a little bit too.
Winnipeg's a big little town, and it's the same thing for our country. That's what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah, maybe that's changing. I don't know. Maybe I'd ask you. Do you feel like that's changing? Like, we went to school together in like the 80s and 90s, right? Like, so I mean, is that changed? Maybe, I don't know.
I don't think it has, actually. I think that with social media and things like that, you have people being able to reconnect and, stay connected even more so. And I think that that hasn't changed that much. That's something I think that we still value. Paul, your films challenge us, unsettle us, and force us to confront ourselves as individuals, as a nation, and beyond. Your work reminds us that the world isn't just places on a map. It's a living archive of stories asking to be told with honesty. Thank you for your courage, your craft, and your heart with us and with the world. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks for all of you for joining us. This is Across This Quiet Land, Stories from the Hearts of Canada. I'm Jarrod Daemon. Until next time, keep looking for the stories that shape us.